All right, my name is Liza. I use she, her pronouns. Today I'm wearing my green glasses with little gold corners. They're large frame. I have a bob haircut. It's sort of blondish gray. I'm wearing a purple sweater, and I'm a white woman sitting in front of a gray wall with an ornately framed painting behind me, and you can see a lamp in over my left shoulder. I'm the program manager for the newcomer programs. There are two newcomer programs at TAC. Today we're going to primarily be talking about the Newcomer and Refugee Artist Mentorship Program. Many of you know me, but I always like to give a little bit of an introduction about myself as part of my land acknowledgement. I'm originally from Ohlone territory, an area that was fully inhabited before Spanish missionaries, conquistadors, and other settlers renamed it San Francisco. There were waves of migration in the city in which I grew up, including gold speculators, Chinese rail workers, Irish migrants, beatniks, black jazz and blues legends, and queer pioneers. I moved to Toronto to go to U of T in 2003, and in 2014 became a permanent resident. It wasn't until I started working in arts management, however, that I first heard with the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant, Toronto Treaty 13, or the Williams Treaties. But I think these are all really important. These are the foundation on which we inhabit this land as settlers, and they've become part of my understanding of community, and also an acknowledgement that Toronto has been the site of human activity since time immemorial, and that this land has been stewarded by both acknowledged and unacknowledged First Peoples, including the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit. And that Toronto continues today to be the home to Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. As a settler on this territory, I've benefited significantly from colonial culture that has overseen genocide, systemic oppression, and exploitation of Indigenous peoples, Black people, and people who are differently abled, poor, or individuals who identify as two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and other queer community members. My work's been faithfully shaped by my entry into this community as an invisible immigrant, and by my work first in theater production and arts management, and now as a funder working primarily with newcomer communities. My perspective on the purpose of art making has radically shifted. I think that we have to work together to end institutional and systemic violence, and that work starts with acknowledgement. As an individual, understanding your own personal privileges or my personal privileges, and also acknowledging that the granting system of which I'm a part has contributed to institutional and systemic inequality. Toronto Arts Council and Foundation specifically have contributed to institutional violence against marginalized folks with both their funding and fundraising practices. And if we don't acknowledge that, we can't really work to undo that harm or work to understand it or dismantle it. I think land acknowledgement should be active engagement in acknowledging yourself and also being part of resistance and solidarity against the injustices that have been inflicted on Aboriginal people of this land and all land. Oops. I want to share one last thing as sort of like a little bit of an inspiration for today. I recently had the great pleasure to read, I know this is going to be backwards for folks on screen, but The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book is about abundance and reciprocity in the natural world and the ways in which we can build systems that replicate that abundance and reciprocity. There's a really lovely message in this book about what we can learn from nature, but it also really resonated with me because as I was reading it, I thought a lot about this program. I thought a lot about the ways in which this program really exemplifies the idea that all flourishing is mutual. And that the best place to store, in the case of the book, to store meat or food is in the belly of your neighbor. And I think you can think about that in terms of knowledge and also what you know about the sector. The best place to store that knowledge is with the next person coming up. It doesn't do you any good to hoard that. And so I really think about that in terms of this program, and I just want to encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance to read this, it's a short book, it's a lovely book by a really incredible Indigenous author, and I think it really ties really nicely into what we're doing here today. All right, so now that is now that we've talked a little bit about sort of foundationally about who I am, I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. So we're going to start off and talk a little bit about the Newcomer and Refugee Artist Mentorship Program. I just want to give you a really, really broad overview so that those of you who are brand new, don't know anything about this program, can get a little bit of that information. If you need more of that information, guidelines and all that stuff can be found on our website. And we also have some resources from some past sessions, so just reach out. Then we're going to talk a little bit very briefly about benefits of mentorship and also things to consider before becoming part of the mentorship program or before taking on a mentee. We're going to talk about matching with mentees for this program specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about applying for the grant and then kind of drilling down from there, talking about how to develop a work plan, how to manage expectations, dealing with conflict and measuring success. And then, as I said at the end, I'll give you a little bit about what's coming up, what you can participate in, how you can get involved in this program, and then we'll answer questions. So let us turn. All right, so a little bit about the grant, just a really quick overview, some eligibility for those who haven't attended previous sessions or who haven't applied before. And just starting off to say that, the goal of this mentorship program is really to provide support for newcomer and refugee artists to develop their artistic practice and establish connections to sustain their practice and livelihood within the Toronto arts community. This grant is given to one individual newcomer artist and a mentor of their choosing who apply together as co-applicants. It's a little bit unusual because most of the time when you apply for a grant, you're either applying as an individual or as part of an organization. But in this program, there are 2 applicants and 2 recipients of funding. A professional newcomer artist can apply from any discipline. Newcomers for the purpose of this program are defined as immigrants or refugees who have lived in Canada for less than 7 years. Newcomer applicants no longer need to have permanent status or pending status, but they need to legally be allowed to work in Toronto with a valid social insurance number, and in Canada, and they must reside in Toronto. That's also true for mentors. Mentors need to be legal residents, have a work permit. And in the case of mentors, you also need to have lived in Toronto for at least a year, and you need to be based here and working here approximately 8 months of the year or more. Good to know that grants to individuals are taxable income, which is why there's the requirement that you be that you have a legal status to work, because this is income that you will need to pay taxes on. And just, throwing it out there for folks who are here, who are thinking about being mentors, thinking about artistic tax requirements might be a great sort of item in your work plan. Newcomers often, may not know the system depending on how long they've been here or how robust of a self-entrepreneurial process they've been in already. So just sort of understanding some of these systems and knowing that TAC is going to issue a T4A and that you're going to be required to pay taxes on a grant as income. Those are the kinds of things that you can think about as part of mentorship. This program provides funding to those newcomer artists to be guided in their chosen arts discipline. So it's open to all artistic disciplines. And the mentorship is submitted by the newcomer artist, but they add mentors as a co-applicant. So both the applicant and the mentor must identify as professional artists or an arts worker in the case of mentors. So you might be a producer, or artistic director, or administrator if you are a mentor, but for applicants newcomer applicants, you need to be a professional artist. What is a professional artist? There is some grace with that, with understanding that it is a flexible definition, but by and large, a professional artist is someone who has trained or done study in their practice, self-taught or through formal training, someone who would be recognized by peers as a practicing artist. They have a body of work. You need minimum of 2 examples of work when you're applying to the program, and you charge for your work, and would work more in your arts practice if that was feasible for you. Again, there is flexibility in that definition, and certainly, we understand that there are barriers, particularly when it comes to equity. And so if you have questions about your professional status, please feel free to reach out to me. We can chat about that. As I said, applicants need to be residents of the City of Toronto, so you need to have an M postal code to apply. Applicants who are newcomers have to have arrived after January 1st, 2019. You need to be legally allowed to work with a social insurance number. And if you have previously received this grant as a mentee, you can't get it again as a mentee. So mentors, you can apply more than once. If you've received this funding either as a mentee or as a mentor before, you can apply again. But mentors can only be attached to one application at a time. So you need to finish your mentorship before you apply again and start another mentorship. The total grant amount is $15,000. That is split evenly, $7,500 paid directly to the artist, $7,500 directly to the mentor. Deadline for 2016 is April 13th. And then activities in your work plan. So we're going to talk more about work plans later in the session, but those activities cannot start until July 1st, 2026. And for the purposes of the grant, your activities need to be wrapped up by June 30th of 2027. So it's a one-year program. You don't have to work together the whole year, but you have to start after July 1st and you have to finish before June 30th of the next year. Just another thing that's sort of a general thing that I like to remind folks about, this is not a project grant. Some of you may be really familiar with getting grants from TAC in visual arts or media creation, or, maybe you've recorded an album and you've gotten funding. This funding is intended to support both artists' time in mentorship. It's not, we have this idea, we want to make this thing. That's not what this funding is for. You may have ideas that you want to work on, or maybe your mentee has something that they want to work on and it's going to be a hands-on mentorship. But what you're being funded for in this program is the mentorship. As I said, they're self-designed and can be up for 1 year. And I also want to just acknowledge a couple of the assessment criteria, because a couple of things have changed here and they're really relevant to to mentors. And related to how mentors are assessed by the panel. So these are small changes, but they've had a meaningful impact in terms of how we want mentors to contribute to the applications, but also just trying to be more clear about what our expectations are. So artistic merit is important, but will the mentorship support the applicant's stated goals and serve their needs? Will it provide a meaningful experience to both mentor and mentee? Does the mentor have suitable experience and qualifications? Does the mentor understand and support the mentee's goals and demonstrate enthusiasm to leverage their network on behalf of the newcomer artist? Is the mentorship work plan realistic? So that's the assessment criteria that the panel are looking at. The one that was added is the second one. Does the mentor understand and support the mentee's goals and demonstrate enthusiasm to leverage their network? We added this because overwhelmingly, what has set great applications apart from good ones are mentors. Good applications, most applications, assume the panel likes the mentee's work. They think the work plan is reasonable. They think the goals and the fit between mentor and mentee are reasonable. But what takes it up a notch is that buy-in from the mentor, a language, a tone of welcome and abundance of, I'm so excited to introduce this person to these people. I have a lot of great ideas for how we can get their work into open the right doors. If it's a skills building mentorship, it's like, I have space for them, or I have access to infrastructure. Whatever it may be, there's a tone in applications that, not always, but often, and it comes from the mentor. So that is sort of an overview of the program. Now I want to chat just really briefly about why mentorship, like why you should be part of this program. There's a lot of benefits to mentoring in this program, not only the funding. A lot of people are already doing mentorship in, their own worlds and their own practice, so it's nice to get recognized for that work and to actually get paid for it. So the $7,500 is great. It's nice. But there's a lot of other benefits to being part of the program beyond the grant amount. Even if you don't receive the grant, by applying to this program, you're part of our newcomer network. You're building community. We're going to help to reinforce those community connections. We have a lot. Are doing constantly more and more activities and events to try to build out this sense of community for newcomer artists. And so mentors and folks who want to connect with newcomer artists and support them are always going to be welcome in that community. Your expertise, your leadership and perspective is going to support folks who are new to Toronto. There's also, we hear from past participants a lot that, recipients of the grant really report appreciating the opportunity to be in this program, and they want to pay it forward. They also appreciate the opportunity they've had to reconnect with colleagues or former colleagues on behalf of their mentees. And mentors express a renewed sense of community engagement. Mid-career artists in particular have told us that paying it forward is a big reason that they want to be mentors in this program. They received mentorship, it was meaningful, and they're looking for opportunities to share that with the next wave of Canadian artists. We've also heard from many mentors that have spoken about how working with mentees invigorated their own practice. That new ideas, or they got excited about their own work again because of the engagement with mentees. Past participants, you're part of this sector ecosystem, and you can really start to think about how you can shape change through mentorship, directing people to particular resources or support networks, building new pathways to sustainability, shifting who gets a voice in the landscape, and, providing guidance toward or away from institutions and pathways that have stymied or stalled artists previously. I think if you think about the opportunities to be part of sector change, you can really see how mentorship has a huge role to play in that. And as I said, reconnecting with art experiences or other colleagues that you've worked with in the past. One of the big benefits about being a mentor in this program is getting to slow down and enjoy art as an audience member again. Hopefully you'll be going to see things with your mentee. And, sometimes when you work in the sector, you can get away a little bit from enjoying art experiences. And a lot of past mentors in this program have said, just getting to go to the galleries and seeing the work again was really great. There are also some things to consider. Do you have the capacity and time to take this on? What can you offer this specific mentee? Does it align with their goals? Have you been transparent about limitations that you might have? Is there something that you can learn or something that excites you about working with this person? Are you prepared to share your practice and network? What tools or resources might be useful to you to support this work? Have you been a mentor before? Would there be resources that could help you be the best mentor you can be? And what might be helpful for your mentee? Are you prepared to advocate for your mentee? And do you have biases or blind spots? These are all really good things to consider before deciding to take on a mentee. It is a big responsibility. A lot of folks have told us that they feel really passionate about working with mentees. And so you just want to be realistic and thoughtful about your capacity to do that and open with them with potential mentees. So I know a lot of people are wondering about how to get matched up. Now you've learned a little bit about the program. We've thought a little bit about whether mentorship is right for you. I know that there are lots of different types of people on the call today with us. So some of you are here because you've already connected with a mentee and you just want to know more about how to be a great mentor. Others of you are hoping to be connected with a mentee, and some of you might be mentees looking for mentors. After this session, we're going to have 2 mentor matching sessions, and at the end, I'll tell you how to coming up, I'll tell you how you're going to sign up for those. If you're here as a mentor, you can also join our database, and you're all going to get the slides that we're sharing here today, so you'll be able to get these links, and maybe colleagues can share these links in the chat. We have an ongoing database of mentors, which is going to be getting developed and expanded. And so I think that's a really great way for folks to get connected with us. Join our mentor database. You're here today, and if you've registered for today's session, you will also receive information about registering for those mentor matching sessions. But in addition to the mentor matching sessions, we also do, through Neighborhood Arts Network, lots of other mentorship programs. Neighborhood Arts Network has a Mentor in Residence program. They match folks for the Black Arts program. They also support the Indigenous program that has a mentorship component. So being part of the Neighborhood Arts Network mentor database is a really great way to just get your foot in the door and get your feet wet with being part of this mentor community. We do really want to encourage mentee-mentor collaboration during the application process. So we're here to facilitate that and support that. And one of the ways that we're going to be doing that is, in addition to the matching, we also have a grant writing workshop that's coming up toward the end of March. It'll have general information about preparing your application, but we're really going to hone in on creating a work plan. And as I said, Neighborhood Arts Network, my colleagues Irel and I will be supporting matching at the next two events. And also, if you can't come to one of those events or you don't meet someone at one of those events, if you're on the mentor roster and you reach out to Zyrel, there will be some ongoing one-on-one support for applicants who are still looking for mentors. But we really need to get them in the pipeline by March 12th or so. After that, it's hard to match people before the deadline for the grant. So you'll want to take a look at this. These are the next sessions. As I said, the mentor matching sessions. And I think it's important when you're in these conversations with folks and you're thinking about matching with people, you really want to have open conversations about and set expectations. So let's say you're at one of these matching sessions, or Zyrel's talked to you and now you're going to be meeting with the mentee. Setting expectations and sort of making sure that you're on the same page is really important. So being honest and clear about your availability, your network and experience, your capacity. You really want to establish straightforward and honest rapport. It'll help you to really quickly determine if you're a good fit. Most people have been in situations where they've experienced disappointment in relationships, maybe on a job or project or even in your personal life. And this can occur when your expectations are not aligned. So it's really helpful to avoid that. To really clearly communicate what you expect to offer and also receive. So have some conversation about communication styles. Do you like to connect over email? Do you prefer to meet in person? What sort of cadence would you want to meet? What types of things can you support? Really try to lay that groundwork. That's going to make it a lot easier for you when you start working on your work plan. Expectations are not demands. It's just a way to, openly and honestly communicate. Here's what we hope will happen, based on our previous communications. These things can change, but it really helps people reach their goals when you're very clear about what you bring to the table. And really honestly, this can be tricky. People are complicated. That's why it's important to be really clear and maintain boundaries. I think we had a quote in our Mentor 101 handbook from Preeton Semple, which was, "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously." And I think that that's a nice thought, especially in this mutual benefit, all flourishing is mutual. Humans are diverse, complicated creatures, and many people have past experiences, trauma, social, financial, emotional hardships, and especially newcomers. Like, this is a community that, they might come from different cultural contexts. They may have experienced something difficult, or they've had different experiences throughout their life that have informed how they communicate or informed their boundaries. And so it's really important to be clear about your own boundaries, whether that is about how frequently you're going to be available, or the way that you communicate, or what you're going to do together. And I also just want to remind everybody that you always have the right to walk away from a relationship that doesn't feel safe or respectful. So, if you are in a mentorship and, you're experiencing microaggressions or racism or harassment or anything that is like really infringing on your capacity to feel safe, you can leave those situations. And we do have a series of conflict mediation suggestions, but you're also always welcome to come back to myself or to come to Zyrel and talk to us about what's going on. All right, so what's next? So you have decided to mentor, you've matched with someone, you've had an initial conversation about your expectations and sort of setting your boundaries. Now you're going to go ahead and submit an application for the grant. So the first thing you need to do is that you both need to be registered in Smart Simple. Some of you here today might be registered as part of an organization that you work with, but you need to have an individual account in Smart Simple with a separate email address. So if you have an account that's tied to an organization, you're going to have to set up another account just for yourself as an individual. Both applicants have to have those individual accounts in order to be connected to the application. There are, and newcomer artists should be the ones to create the draft application, and they should add you as a mentor. If there's, questions about that, or you need help navigating Smart Simple, again, please let me know. I'm happy to help, or I can connect you to our tech support. There are 3 application components. There's a mentorship details section, which we're going to talk about in detail. And then there's a resume CV section and support material section. Resumes and CVs are required for both the applicant and their mentor. And I think that it's really, really advisable to review those resumes and CVs together. Not always, but very frequently, I think newcomer artists just submit their CV and their mentor has never seen it before. I think that it's a really good idea for mentors to take a look at that, both CVs, share your resume or CV with your applicant, and take a look at theirs. Some newcomer artists have limited experience marketing themselves or demonstrating past experience in a CV standard that is consistent with what we see in Canada. Being open and reviewing those documents is going to, help make the application stronger. And also if there are inconsistencies or things that are not clear in the application, that are more well laid out in the CV, that's something that you might want to pull out into the application. So I definitely think it's a good idea to look at that together. The other item is support materials. So for this program, the newcomer artist is required to submit at least 2 examples of work, and one is ideally from the last 2 years. Support material for mentors is optional, but in some cases, I would say it's highly encouraged. I think, determining whether you should include support material, it may be, it's obvious for me, but sometimes it's kind of intuitive. Some examples might be, what I'll say is it really depends on the application and what you're doing in the mentorship. So as an example, if you're both practicing artists, and you have a similar style, or there's a lot of artistic skills building in the mentorship, so this is an emerging artist or an artist who wants to learn a new technique, yes, then it would make sense to include material from the mentor, because you're going to be focusing on artistic practice and artistic development as part of your mentorship. If, however, this is more of a relational mentorship where the newcomer artist, let's say they're very senior or their practice is pretty established, and you as the mentor, maybe you're not even an artist, you're an arts worker or a producer. In that case, it might not be as relevant to include support material from the mentor. So I think what you want to think about is that support material should be like the delicious amuse-bouche or dessert of the application. It's the thing that like fills it out and brings color and, enhances, it's like salt or lemon. It's like it enhances what's written in the textual components of the application. We get to see the work, but we also get a deeper understanding of what informs the work or where the work comes from. And so sometimes that mentor contribution can be really meaningful. Another example, like if your work is very conceptual, or you do a lot of public art, then it might make sense. If it's really beautiful and it really like brings more awareness of the artists, then it might be really important and impactful to do that. I think overall, one of the things that's really important to think about with applications is who are you writing to? You're writing to a panel of other artists, and they're all coming from across different disciplines. And so, you want to make sure that they have all the context they need, because their level of depth of knowledge about your practice might be nothing. If you're a media artist and there's a panelist who's a dancer, they might know very little about filmmaking. So you want to make sure there's enough context, but also that you're setting yourselves apart from all of these other applications, because everybody's application is following the same framework. You want to make sure that you're telling a story that's going to resonate and connect. So now we're going to talk really quickly about the mentorship details, like what are we actually asking in the questions? This is the main part of the application. And I've highlighted the two questions here that I think are really most relevant for mentors. The first one is a mentor statement. This is going to be answered by you, the mentor. It's either 250 or 500 words, so it's not a lot. But what's really important to remember here is that you are selling yourself as a mentor. And as I said, to remember who the panelists are. So if you're a really famous artist, and this happens, sometimes you forget that others might not know your body of work. And so even if you're really well known, you need to talk about what you've done. Don't assume that the panel is going to get everything from your CV. Of course, they're going to look at it. But what we want to know here is like, what are the specific things that you've done that relate to the objectives of the newcomer artist? So if I'm a newcomer artist and I want to make an EP, and you're you're an artist who's had 3 albums, please tell us that you've recorded 3 albums here in your mentor statement, and say, that experience is really going to help me as a mentor for so-and-so because they want to make an EP. So I think in that mentor statement, you want to reiterate that you understand the objectives of the artist, and you want to talk about, with respect to your own experience, what you can bring to those goals and achieving those goals. This is also true in the work plan. Don't understand that panelists understand the workflow, context, or mechanisms, mechanics of your industry. Give relevant context. I have an example here, again, a film example. When the panel initially read through this application, they thought, I don't think that this applicant it doesn't seem urgent. Like, they've had some success. They've been an AD on several films, they're working. And it took another panelist to say, yeah, but in the film industry, it's really hard to move from this to this. This artist is saying, I want to make my own work. And this mentor is really the right person to help them make their own work, because they know those systems. But again, that context should have been in the application. Film is a very insular industry, and it requires a lot of networking. The work plan should reflect that and provide that context, so that we understand, yes, this person is working as an AD and they'll continue to be able to work in that way. But if they want to work on their art in these ways, they really need to make the jump from here to here. And this is how we're going to do that. So don't forget about context. The most important part of this application is the work plan. And so I'm sharing this slide about types of mentorship because I think it's something that mentors should think about. This is an individual program. It's kind of prescribed in the way that the mentorship is designed. It's one artist and one mentor, but that doesn't mean that you can't bring other elements to your work plan. So for example, let's say you've got a multidisciplinary artist and you are primarily a ceramicist, but you also, you're going to help your mentee make some connections with animators because your mentee wants to animate their ceramic work. I don't know. I'm making this up. So that would be sort of like a constellation mentorship where you're going to like try to find other mentors to inform other parts of their practice that maybe you don't have as much exposure or experience in. It's always important to think about what is the peer-to-peer aspect here? There have definitely been applications where, the mentor is saying, I'm going to really help this artist get established in the city through all of these connections that I have. But actually, they're more senior than me as an artist. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to also like develop my own practice through this mentorship. I see it as a mutual learning opportunity. Great. It's always nice to hear, basically panelists appreciate and generally remember and assess it favorably when mentees talk about learning or mentors talk about learning from mentees. Another opportunity is like maybe you're connected to an organization and there are opportunities for your mentee for resources or infrastructure that you can access or provide. I do want to offer a point of caution, just overall, that all work plans should avoid the optics of exploitation. So I have seen applications where it really looks like this mentee is going to be an intern at an organization and this grant is paying for it. And you don't really, the objectives of the mentee get lost. Like it's not reaching their goals. I mean, maybe a little bit because they're getting a job, but they're not actually getting a job because this isn't official through the organization. It's this grant they've got. So you want to avoid, heavy production work or sort of heavy administrative work that isn't in service to the mentee's goals. Shadowing is great. Hands-on experience is wonderful. Avoid situations that are exploitative of either the mentor or the mentee. It can go the other way too. I've definitely seen applications on the other side where it looks like this mentor is going to be basically just an editor for this mentee. That's not a mentorship either. So those things will help you in thinking about how you can develop the work plan. So some things to consider really baseline. How often are you going to meet? How long are those meetings going to be? Like how many hours are you going to meet when you meet? You can talk about your schedule. How long should the mentorship last? Are you going to work together for a year? It may be that like the mentee has a goal to like the big goal is to submit stuff to a festival and that submission deadline is November 10th. So you're going to have a really intense mentorship period through the fall, but then you're going to take a bit of a break and then you're going to come back and maybe do some follow-up once a month for coffee. Great. The more unique you can make the plan, the better. That's how it becomes memorable, especially if there are times of the year that you're not available or, you know that you're going to have a period where you're going to be busier or your mentee's going to be busier. And so maybe you're going to meet less frequently during that period, or you're going to work really intensely toward one goal and then have some periods of less intense time. So all of that actually adds, like panelists would much rather read a thoughtful and unique plan where the mentor's not available for 2 months than a plan where they meet every week, but there's no substance. So talk about what you're going to talk about when you're meeting, talk about where you're going to go, who you're going to introduce this artist to. As I said, sometimes that mentorships are designed around particular activities or goals. And so you want to talk about the details of like what it takes to do the work to get it in there and how, if there's homework you're going to assign or if there's like follow-up that you're going to ask the mentee to do. We want to understand and we want to get a feeling that this mentorship is not transactional, but relational. So, again, demonstrating that related the relational quality and speaking about it, speaking enthusiastically. The work plan is really an area where mentors can demonstrate their influence in this application, like really specific details about who you're going to introduce them to, industry events or access. We just want to see the mentee's goals and objectives filled out via your skill, your experience, your knowledge. Again, just stressing that this is not a project grant, so there's no requirement to collaborate on making anything together, and there's no budget. The funding is intended to support your time together. It's not to fund a project or production. All right, so now you're in your mentorship and things are, chugging along. I want to talk a little bit briefly about conflict resolution and mediation. Some people do experience conflict in mentorships, but it doesn't have to have a negative outcome. And I think it's really important to think about conflict as being an opportunity rather than, a conflict where there's intensity. If you've tried to address the conflict directly, but you're having difficulty, you can consider some mediation support. Conflict mediation process can be supported by organizational staff or external mediators, maybe somebody that you mutually agree upon that you can involve to discuss what's going on. The mediator's role is to facilitate a conversation about the conflict, and the goal of mediation is to guide a safe and productive conversation towards resolution. So there, I've put this little chart here about should you seek support? And really it's just about how open are the parties to talking? So if they're not open at all to resolving the conflict, okay, that's obvious. But if they are, and you think it would be beneficial to have somebody support you, you can absolutely reach out, or you might find that there's another organization or, support that might serve your needs. At the end of that process, you might decide that the mentorship relationship is just not working with the current mentee or mentor. And that's when you should reach out to us. In some cases, we might be able to support by offering an alternate mentor, especially if you haven't applied yet. But even if you've gotten the grant and you're working together, it may be possible to try to support you with someone else. Or we would just say, I think it's best in this case that you terminate the mentorship. At the end of the day, when the project is done, newcomer artists are asked to submit a final report. But again, this is not an impact report in the sense that we're not asking for a budget reconciliation. It's really about, did you gain something from this? Was it meaningful? Were there challenges? What's next for you? So if it doesn't work out, there isn't going to be a penalty at the TAC. Maybe in a rare case, if you've been working together for 2 weeks, you might have to rescind the grant funding, but even that is not a penalty to you. It's okay, it didn't work out. We're going to try, we'll try something else. And then at the end, I just want to talk I think it's always really important if you get this grant or in any mentoring relationship to kind of measure and then close the chapter, really celebrate that success. So it's good to do a reflection at the end of the mentorship. How did this go? Did what we do meet the needs of the artist? Go back and look at the application and say hey, these were your objectives. How do you feel about this? And this is also something that might be sort of good to do every month or every couple of months to say hey, are we feeling good about this? Are we being challenged and inspired in the right ways? Are we, doing the things that we said we were going to do? And then there's just a note here about kind of continued support for mentees. As I said, mentors are not responsible for the final report, but we do often turn to mentors to say, hey, could you encourage your mentee to submit their final report if it's overdue or we haven't gotten it? Individual artists who are out of standing with us, meaning you haven't submitted a report that you're required to submit, means that you can't apply again. So that would be really a bummer for your artist. So helping them, making sure they've submitted that final report. Again, it's not something that we are using as a measure of success. It's something that we are using to say, hey, what can we do to support folks? Are there similar challenges? We want to get a kind of gauge on, are there trends in this program? Review goals and assess how you've done. Were there barriers to achieving those goals? What's next? What have you both personally and professionally gained from the experience? And then this is the last one. This grant program, or this mentorship, because it's part of a grant program, has a finite end date. But hopefully, if you've had a good mentorship experience, this is a relationship that's going to be ongoing. But I do think it's really important at the end of the grant portion of this to sort of have a clarifying conversation of like, hey, what does our relationship look like going forward? Sometimes the folks who have been part of this program form lifelong bonds. There are folks who have been mentees and they are still connected to their mentor, or they were a mentee and then they became a mentor. And so this program has a long reach. And so, it's good to talk about, hey, what are you going to do next, and how can I support you? I'm always here for you. Or maybe like, feel free to email me, but I might not be as available in the future. So that is it for me in terms of sort of formal stuff I want you to know about. I'm going to take some questions now, but as I said, next steps are to register for those matching sessions. You might have noticed on that slide that, and in fact, maybe I'll go back to it here, because the mentor matching session on February 26th is primarily for media artists, music artists, theater artists, curators, and textile artists. And then the one on March 12th is primarily for visual artists, literary artists, community arts, and dance. If you are not available for one of these sessions, the one that aligns with your practice, reach out to Zyrel, let her know that you're interested in being matched, you can't attend the event. As I said, join the JOT form, like join our mentor roster. We will be doing some other matching, but we're going to try to primarily funnel folks into events. It's possible, let's say you're a music artist, but you're not available on the 26th. We might be able to facilitate doing some stuff on the 12th. So let us know, and we'll try to coordinate and make sure that we can get folks matched up. Just want to stress that there's no guarantee. We don't guarantee a match, not for newcomer artists or mentors. So, we try to help support applicants in this process, but it's a competitive grant. And so, we do our best, but that's not our primary, goal. We're really trying to support applicants and get folks the grant. So we will do our best to support anyone who's looking to be matched. And if for example, this is your last year of eligibility because you arrived in 2019, that's another thing, like let Zyrel know. And that's primarily for mentees. It doesn't apply so much for mentors, but I know there are lots of mentees here today. So that is basically it for me for now. I'm going to turn over to the Q